The Iraqi army makes major advances in the strategic city of Tikrit after launching a massive military offensive against ISIS militants. Israeli warplanes launch airstrikes on 12 targets in the Gaza Strip as Zionist forces continue their crackdown against Palestinians. And millions of Muslims from around the world mark the beginning of the holy month of Ramadan. This is Al Ittijah World News. I'm Zainab Alawi. The Iraqi army has made further gains in the war to root out the Islamic State of Iraq and Syria from the country, with the latest military operation targeting the extremist militants in the strategic city of Tikrit.
Aided by tanks and armored vehicles on the ground and fighter jets in the sky for aerial cover, thousands of Iraqi soldiers marched to the restive city of Tikrit.
Fighting is still on and Tikrit University now is under our full control. The university campus is very spacious. It has an area of 80,000 square meters and has a number of buildings. But the security plan was very carefully drawn up and the university building was cleared. Reinforcements were sent to the troops on the ground and the Iraqi flag was hoisted over the university building. Up to this moment, more than 70 terrorists were killed and dozens of vehicles, which were used in Saladin province near Tikrit or at the governor's office, have been destroyed.
The operation to retake the capital of the central Salahuddin province has proven to be tougher than expected. Since combats have entered the second day against the Islamic State of Iraq and Syria militant group. The city of Tikrit was captured by the extremists on June 11th as they swept across large parts of northern Iraq, gaining control of the city of Mosul, the capital of Nineveh province. According to army sources, ISIS has been pushed out of most of Tikrit, with fighting somewhat subdued this afternoon. Over the past few days, Iraqi armed forces have engaged in fierce clashes with the terrorists, who have threatened to take their acts of violence to other Iraqi cities, including the capital, Baghdad. However, their advances were halted as Iraqi military forces and volunteer fighters began engaging them on several fronts, pushing the militants out of several areas they had earlier overrun. Meanwhile, Iraq has announced that it has received the first batch of military jets ordered from Russia in order to help them fight the militants. Iraq's Air Force Chief General Anwar Hama Amin said that Sukhoi fighter jets will be operational within days.
We are in dire need at the moment for the Russian Sukhoi Su-25, which is specialized in supporting troops and combating terrorism. This plane will come into service within the next 4 days to support our troops and fight the ISIL terrorist organization.
The arrival of the jets will likely aid the army in the operation to root out ISIS from Iraq, tipping the momentum clearly in the government's favor.
Let's get our correspondent in Iraq, Mustafa Kattan, on the line now for more. Mustafa, if you could update us on the latest clashes between ISIS militants and the Iraqi army in the north of the country.
Yes, actually, the Iraqi army now is fighting the militants in the province of Salahuddin. Most of the cities in Salahuddin province is under the control of the Iraqi army. More than 80% of Tikrit city is under the control of the Iraqi army, and it will be utterly under control of the Iraqi forces in the next few days. Also, the Iraqi army launched another major attack on the militant hideouts in the province of Diyala, in Maqdadiya, and also in Baquba. But still, the militants still some heavy clashes and intensified battles occurred in the city of Sa'diya, where the militants have intensified presence there. some security experts said that the Iraqi army will face a huge challenge because the militants actually they were able to retreat to Syrian territories when they actually create a safe haven there. They went there whenever they be under huge pressure by the Iraqi army and the Iraqi forces. They went to Syria to regather and regroup, and then they actually head back to the Iraqi areas to attack again. So the Iraqi army, as the security expert said, need to cooperate with the Syrian army and with the Syrian government to fight a common enemy, which is ISIL terrorist group. Yes.
Well, is there a hope that with these fighter jets arriving in from Russia, is there a sense of hope that the Iraqi government could be able to eradicate these extremist militants?
Well, the Iraqi army actually he attacked the militants on several fronts. Most of the attacks are concentrating on in Salah ad-Din, especially in Tikrit, and also in Beji. The refinery of Beji is under the Iraqi forces' control, but the city of Beji is still not fully controlled, and the militants have not been utterly dislodged from the city of Beji. So the Iraqi army needs to cooperate with the Syrian government, and also they need to gather some intelligence information to deprive the militants from launching another major attack, and actually to fully expel them from Iraqi territories and Iraqi soil. Now the Iraqi army actually still is fighting the militants also in the west of the country, in Anbar province, and the most of the fights are concentrating in the city of Fallujah, and also the Iraqi army now trying to regaining both cities of Ana and Rawa. The city of Haditha is under the control of the Iraqi army, and especially the dam of Haditha, which had been targeted by the militants in the previous 3 or 4
Okay, now
days.
what are Iraqis saying should be the political solution here to resolve this situation in Iraq?
Well, the political view in Iraq is a little bit hazy, especially after the remarks of Mr. Masoud Barzani, the president of the Kurdistan region. As the political figures in Iraq and politicians said, that his remarks will deepen the problem in Iraq, political problem in Iraq, and will widen the gap between the political figures, especially the Iraqi government or the Iraqi politicians trying to form a new government and try to sign the parliament speaker, and of course the president and the prime minister. If the politicians are agreed to form a unity government or a salvation government, that can help, as they said, that can help to end the security crisis, because always the security situation in Iraq was attached to the political process, and whenever the political performance in Iraq gets fluctuated, it can reflect negatively, and we witness security breaches in all over the country.
Okay, thank you very much for that, Mustafa Kattan there, our correspondent in Iraq. Iraq's national coalition, which is led by former Prime Minister Iyad al-Allawi, announced it will abstain from attending the first parliamentary session, which is scheduled for July 1st, unless the political powers create a roadmap to stop the security deterioration and heal the country's political divisions.
The National Coalition decided not to attend the first session of Parliament to distance ourselves from the consequences of the session, unless the political powers put a roadmap to stop the security deterioration and heal country's rift. The National Coalition calls upon the partners in the political process to boycott the first parliamentary session and reject the false changes that will not serve our people and not diffuse the serious crisis facing our beloved country.
And as is the case in all conflict zones, the highest price is always paid by defenseless civilians. In the latest exodus across Iraq, thousands of the country's Christians have been forced to flee their homes amid rising fears of religious persecution by ISIS militants.
Terrorism has no religion, but it surely does have the tendency to target them. As fears mount of ISIS attacking Christians near the captured city of Mosul, thousands of alarmed residents are running for their lives. Fierce fighting between ISIS militants and Kurdish forces has left these Christians no option but to seek refuge in Kurdistan's Erbil.
We fled bombardment by artillery, mortars and tanks. They bombed the district, people from here fighting with people from there, and as a result all the houses of the people were destroyed. Therefore we took our families and fled.
We decided to leave after we heard that terrorists had entered Karkush, and clashes ensued between them and the Peshmerga. We were shelled by mortars, so we fled. We wouldn't have left if we were not forced to. No one likes to leave his home.
Most of the refugees from predominantly Christian communities of Karakosh are calling for peace.
It was all caused by the extremists. We were caught up in the crossfire. Our only demand is peace. We have no needs but peace. The most important thing that people want is security and to live a happy life.
Yet, security under the current situation is a long shot. Militants from the Islamic State of Iraq and Syria have targeted Christian groups as well as Muslim Shias for their religious or confessional differences. In many extreme cases, ISIS executed Iraqis from various sects for their alleged infidelity. Now that ISIS is expanding across Iraq, fears are rising of what the future would hold should the extremist group come to power.
Iran's Supreme Leader Ayatollah Sayyid Ali Khamenei has refuted claims that what is happening in Iraq is a Sunni-Shia conflict, stressing that it is a war between terrorists and their opponents. Our correspondent in Tehran has more details.
While addressing the families of those who fell victim to terrorism, the leader of the Islamic Revolution, Ayatollah Sayyid Ali Khamenei, said that the enemies of the Islamic nation are working to create a regional civil war.
The enemy is investing in civil wars in the region and pins hope on a Shia-Sunni war to get rid of the Islamic awakening. What is happening in Iraq is not a Shia-Sunni war. It is a war of terrorism against the opponents of terrorism and a war between pro-Westerners and the advocates of a nation's independence.
The leader made the comments while meeting with the families of those killed in a terrorist attack on the Iranian capital on June 28, 1981. The bombing, known as Haftatir, claimed the life of the chief of Iran's judiciary at the time, Ayatollah Sayyid Mohammad Baheshti, along with 72 senior Iranian officials.
We shall never forget the martyrs of the historic and unforgettable day. The Iranian nation has always been a victim of terrorism backed by arrogant powers to this day. Those killed 33 years ago are martyrs who had big dreams for Iran.
The Iranian government has always held the terrorist group MKO, backed by the US and the Israelis, for the bombing. The memory of that day remains engraved in the Iranian nation, along with many other attacks which killed tens of thousands of people following the revolution of 1979 and the birth of the Islamic Republic. On the anniversary of the biggest terrorist attack to ever target the Islamic Republic of Iran 33 years ago, the leader of the Islamic Revolution has shed more light on terrorism rocking the region and the world. The leader of the Islamic Revolution believes that terrorism has one goal, and that is the destruction of the region and its religion. But he also has a solution for this, and that is unity. He believes that if the people of the region unite against it, they can defeat terrorism. Reporting for AEE TV, Hussein Dabash, Tehran.
Syrian President Bashar al-Assad has hailed Russia for its stance in supporting the Syrian people and the right to sovereignty and independence. Assad's remarks came during a meeting with Russian Deputy Foreign Minister Sergei Ryabkov in the Syrian capital Damascus. The Syrian leader added that terrorism plaguing the region requires efforts from all countries to counter it in every possible way. Well, the Al-Qaeda offshoot of the Islamic State of Iraq and Greater Syria has declared the establishment of an Islamic Caliphate or Islamic State saying they will impose their caliphate on areas they have conquered in Syria and Iraq, as they called on all residents to pledge their loyalty. In an audio recording distributed online, the militant group announced its chief Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, the caliph and leader for Muslims everywhere, adding that the caliphate will extend from Aleppo in northern Syria to Diyala in Iraq. The militant group, known for its ruthless tactics and systemic abuses in Syria and Iraq, said the words Iraq and the Levant have been removed from the name of the Islamic State in official papers and documents. Meanwhile, ISIS militants have publicly crucified 8 men belonging to a rival militia in the east of the Syrian province of Aleppo. Local sources said that the extremists carried out the executions in Deir Hafar town, where the bodies will remain for 3 days. Similar heinous acts were conducted in Al-Bab town near the Turkish border, where a man was also crucified for battling the ISIS. Rival militant groups have been engaged in deadly infighting that has left hundreds dead in recent days. In other news now, Israeli warplanes launched 12 airstrikes on the central and southern parts of the Gaza Strip earlier today, injuring 2 Palestinians. Another 2 Palestinians were wounded after Israeli tanks shelled the tiny coastal enclave late on Saturday.
Israeli aggression against Palestinians appears to have no bounds. On the eve of the holy month of Ramadan, Israeli warplanes launched multiple airstrikes late on Saturday and early on Sunday, targeting 12 sites across the coastal enclave, wounding 2 people and severely damaging property in Gaza City. Meanwhile, in a retaliatory attack, multiple rockets launched from the Gaza Strip landed in southern occupied territory, wounding several people there. One of the rockets hit a paint factory in an industrial zone in the city of Sderot, setting the building ablaze but without reportedly causing any casualties. At least 2 Palestinians were also killed and several others injured in an Israeli air drone strike against the Gaza Strip on Friday. Resistance groups have fired 25 rockets and mortar rounds from Gaza in the past 2 weeks, according to Israeli occupation forces. The border between Gaza and the Israeli entity has been tense since the apparent disappearance of 3 Israeli settlers from the West Bank on June the 12th. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu had accused the resistance movement Hamas of kidnapping the settlers and launched sweeping search operations to find them. Hamas, on the other hand, has repeatedly rejected accusations that it was behind their disappearance. Since the beginning of the search, 5 Palestinians have been killed in the West Bank and nearly 400 detained, mostly Hamas members. Zionist troops have also raided some 2,100 buildings in the West Bank. The latest Israeli attacks against Palestinians has left many to wonder if an escalation in both the West Bank and Gaza Strip by Zionist forces may be on the horizon.
Meanwhile, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu warned on Sunday that the Zionist regime is ready to expand its operations in Gaza after Israeli warplanes carried out 12 airstrikes overnight on the coastal enclave.
Over the weekend, the IDF attacked multiple targets in response to firing at Israel from the Gaza Strip. We are ready to expand this operation as per need.
Now, millions of Muslims have marked the beginning of the holy month of Ramadan as they took to mosques and markets as part of their annual rituals to welcome 30 days of fasting, during which they hope to purify their bodies and souls.
The moon has taken its crescent shape, born in the middle of the sky. For those gazing up, it marked the beginning of the holy month of Ramadan, and so they spread the word. More than 1 billion Muslims are greeting the holy month of Ramadan, during which fasting from food and water is observed.
In the holy fasting month, we feel closer to God and we can seek any guidance from Him.
The markets are bustling with life, as Muslims are stocking up on supplies they will need throughout the 30 days of fasting. Yet, the necessity does not hide the fact that the high costs of commodities are affecting Muslims.
I feel like the people are happy. I feel like Ramadan's happiness is alive this year, to be honest. There is also a demand for the dates. Despite the rising costs, they have not become more expensive.
Prices should be as low as possible for those fasting, so that they can break the fast well and can feed their children well, but they have difficulty surviving because of the low salaries.
Muslims unite in mass prayer, especially during the month of Ramadan, a time when attending the mosque is all the much favorable. Yet for Palestinians living under Israeli occupation, praying outside the holy compound is the closest thing they get to the holy Al-Aqsa Mosque.
I wish on a day like this, the first day and first prayer in Ramadan, that the Al-Aqsa will be filled with worshippers. Due to restrictions, Palestinians living in Al-Quds sometimes are not allowed to pray inside the mosque.
For many in the Gaza Strip and the West Bank, patience is what Ramadan is all about.
Ramadan is the month of patience for Muslims, so the Muslims are used to being patient in this month, despite the fact that Israel is trying to disturb us. But we are a nation that does not care about threats. It is occupation. There is nothing worse than occupation. If the occupation continues its acts, we hope God will stand by us.
After abstaining from food and water from dawn till dusk for a whole month, Muslims break their fast and get into the spirit of the holidays, which is known as Eid, and lasts for 3 whole days.
Now, the ongoing political oppression in Qatar has given birth to the first ever Qatari opposition movement based in the Egyptian capital, Cairo. Karim Azzuddin has more for us in the following report.
The spokesperson for the Qatari branch of the Tamarrud movement, Khalid Al-Hil, held a press conference in the Egyptian capital, Cairo, announcing the formation of the first Qatari opposition group. Al-Hil also claimed that his organization had solid proof of widespread government corruption in Qatar.
Today was the announcement of a new opposition entity. We don't expect the government to pledge its support, but the public opinion supports them, and that's all that matters.
The Qatari royal family is spreading chaos in the Arab countries, and this movement is an indication that this area is about to end, and we have to support them.
Al-Hil said that the formation of the opposition group is the result of the ongoing political oppression in the Persian Gulf state. The spokesperson for Egypt's Tamarrud movement stated that Egyptians stand in solidarity with the newly formed Qatari opposition.
Egypt's Tamarrud movement will provide the Qatari movement with all the support it needs, whether political or otherwise.
And while the Qatari opposition group faces an uphill battle in posing a challenge to the rich monarchy in Doha, its formation may signal a step in the direction towards a more inclusive and representative system of governance in the authoritarian states. Once again, Egypt sends a clear message to the world that it stands on the side of the unity of the Arab world by supporting those on a quest for freedom and justice. But will this newly formed opposition entity help tighten the gap between Qatar and its neighboring countries? A question yet to be answered. Reporting for Al-Tijah TV from Cairo, Karim Azzuddin.
Stay with us here on Al-Tijah World News. Still to come. North Korea fires 2 ballistic missiles off its eastern coast ahead of the Chinese president's visit to Seoul. Welcome back. Our top stories are: the Iraqi army makes major advances in the strategic city of Tikrit after launching a massive military offensive against ISIS militants. Israeli warplanes launch airstrikes on 12 targets in the Gaza Strip as Zionist forces continue their crackdown against Palestinians. And millions of Muslims from around the world mark the beginning of the holy month of Ramadan. Renewed clashes broke out between Houthi rebels and Al-Qaeda militants in the northern Yemeni province of Amran, only days after a truce was agreed upon between the Houthis and the government, which is now being accused of backing militant groups. Our Sana'a correspondent Muhammad Al-Attab has the full story.
Clashes between Houthi fighters and Islamist militants have resumed in Yemen's northern governorate of Amran. The militants, consisting largely of local tribesmen, are believed to be linked to Al-Qaeda and supported by government troops, namely the 310th Military Brigades. The latest round of fighting coincides with the fresh offensive launched by militants in a bid to capture Al-Mahshash, Al-Makhad and Beit Badi areas, which were seized by Al-Houthi rebels in recent weeks.
I don't think the truce would hold, because who's running the Takfirist war in the Arab nation are not only influential powers in Yemen, but also these groups receive their order from the US state, and what is going on in Iraq, Syria and Libya is US and Israeli conspiracy. The four Takfiri leaders in Yemen are working by US orders, and evidence of that is their last meeting with the US ambassador to Yemen.
But the commencement of the holy month of Ramadan has also brought with it calls for an end to the bloodshed. These protesters staged rallies calling on the Yemeni president Abdurrabbu Mansour Hadi to enforce the recently brokered ceasefire between the Houthis and the militants.
I think the deal could face the same fate of the previous ones, when either party violated because such agreement has not resolved the root causes of the problem, but it has only provided a cosmetic change to the intense situation. That is why these kings of truces are instantly violated.
Now the country's religious leaders are also joining the chorus of voices calling for an end to the fighting in Amran, saying that the bloodletting should at the very least be stopped during the sacred month of Ramadan. With the worsening security situation across the region, observers are warning that the Iraqi scenario could be repeated in Yemen unless the warring sides agree on a lasting peace deal. Muhammad Al-Attab, AEE TV, Sana'a.
Well, our correspondent in Yemen, Muhammad Al-Attab, joins us now over the phone for more. Muhammad, update us on the latest fighting between Houthi fighters and Islamist militants.
Yeah, regarding the conflict and the clashes between the Houthis and Islamic militants supported by the military brigade, they are still going on, but there are growing attempts to stop these kinds of fights by the government, by the presidential committees. As today, they are also trying to make the deal to be implemented in the ground. In spite of all of these attempts, these escalations are still going on. And as we heard from the political analysts, are saying that there should be a solution that will eradicate the root cause of the problem, especially that the inciters of these kind of sectarian fights in Amran and in Hamdan and in Bani Matar, which are just the outskirts of Sana'a, which is something also annoying to the central government of Sana'a.
Has there been any talk as to what kind of political solution should be put in place?
They are now still discussing to implement the ceasefire. These kind of moves are being supported by the Gulf states. They are trying to also to impose or to enforce this kind of ceasefire. But the real solutions on the ground are still far away from being discussed by the different groups.
Okay, now this ceasefire between the Houthis and the government, is it still in place? Has anybody violated it yet?
It has been violated yesterday, and there are still attempts to make this kind of ceasefire hold in place. But tonight also, I have talked to my sources. They told me that the situation there in Amran is calm, and the situation is secure. There is security in the city of Amran, and they are trying to also the presidential committees to remove the barracks and barricades in order to implement the agreement in the ground. But hopefully that they will reach a lasting ceasefire, because the same scenario will be repeated in Yemen if the groups wouldn't let down wouldn't let down their arms.
Okay, Mohammed, thank you for that. Mohammed Al-Attab there, our Yemen correspondent. Now, pro-Russian rebels in eastern Ukraine have released the last batch of monitors from the Organization for the Security and Cooperation in Europe, only 2 days after releasing the first group. The move came amid mounting anger from Moscow over an attack that targeted a checkpoint on Russian soil.
Over the past 10 days, fierce battles and artillery fire have given way to the language of diplomacy in Ukraine, and despite sporadic skirmishes that still break an extended ceasefire in the east, things have relatively proceeded according to the plan. Late on Saturday, pro-Russian rebels in the Luhansk region released the last of 4 observers from the European security body who were detained last month, a move which separatists distress indicates their commitment to de-escalating the crisis. We have fulfilled our obligations and released all OSCE monitors. It was not easy. They were not with commanders which are under our control. However, we have secured their release. For us, it was important they are alive and well. The news was welcomed by Moscow, which at the same time had something to fret about just inside its border. The Rostov region was targeted with a round of mortar shells. A building and a border crossing checkpoint were directly hit. The attack resulted in no injuries, but a strong condemnation from the Foreign Ministry, which lamented the provocation and demanded that Kiev investigate the incident. Diplomatic efforts, meanwhile, are being stepped up. On the eve of a ceasefire deadline, the leaders of Germany, France and Russia are expected to hold a conference call with Ukraine's President Petro Poroshenko in what is expected to be a fresh push towards finding a settlement over additional sanctions which Brussels and Washington have threatened to impose on Moscow.
Several hundred anti-Kiev protesters have rallied in the eastern Ukrainian city of Luhansk, denouncing the self-imposed Kiev government and calling for an end to the ongoing fighting in the east of the country.
As the deadline for Ukraine's fragile ceasefire looms, tensions are on the rise in the country's east. In the heart of the eastern city of Luhansk, hundreds of residents gathered, calling for peace and an end to the bloodshed in the restive region.
Innocent, peaceful people are dying, and I'm against it. I want to live in peace. I want peace and calm. So we will live and work. So we will live without being afraid. We don't need the authorities like the current ones in Kiev.
A 72-hour extension to President Poroshenko's week-long ceasefire in the region was announced, but pro-Russian rebels, who have agreed to observe the truce, have accused Kiev of breaching the conditions of the truce.
The enemy does not have mercy on anyone and anything, blindly killing us and destroying our houses. Fascism stepped its boot on our Orthodox land, but those who govern bloody Kiev junta made a mistake. Donbass rose up. Donbass will fight for itself and the future of Slavic people.
Chanting politicians stop the war, save Donbass people, anti-Kiev protesters said that Ukrainian troops have invaded their land.
When there are nationalists around who follow someone's orders, and they are indeed gangs operating on the territory of our republics, it's impossible to observe the ceasefire rules. The only way to reach peace is to withdraw the troops. We have nowhere to withdraw as this is our land. But those who came to us must leave the territory of Donetsk and Luhansk People's Republic.
Amid fears that the violence will soon resume on their doorsteps, locals have warned that if necessary, they are ready to take matters into their own hands.
We are for peace, but what is peace? If they continue shooting, we will all take up weapons and defend our land. We will fight for our home, our land where we live, and if they touch us, we will go to Kiev, and they will listen to us in Kiev.
Hundreds of people have been killed and thousands more displaced since the violence began. And with only hours before a shaky ceasefire expires, many fear that the crisis in eastern Ukraine is nowhere near over.
And to get some more analysis on this, we have political analyst Mr. Jonathan Fryer. Mr. Fryer, good to have you with us today. So this ceasefire in the east seems to be faltering. What can be done to convince both sides to stop the violence?
Well, certainly there's a lot of high-level diplomacy going on. Earlier today, both Angela Merkel of Germany and François Hollande of France were party to a conference call, essentially, between Petro Poroshenko, the Ukrainian president, and Mr. Putin in order to try to calm the situation. As you know, the ceasefire was due to expire on Friday, but has been extended until late tomorrow. The question now is whether over the next 24 hours really the ceasefire can be made to work, because otherwise it could be a very dangerous situation. We already know that several soldiers on the Ukrainian side have been killed, and there are rumors of other casualties as well. So it's a very tense situation.
And where does this shaky ceasefire leave the peace talks on Ukraine between Kiev, the self-proclaimed regions, and Russia?
Well, essentially, Mr. Poroshenko has put forward a 15-point peace plan, which he would like to have, obviously, the formal endorsement of that by outside powers, but in particular, an acceptance by the separatists that they will lay down arms, stop military action, and actually negotiate a way forward, which is what all the outside parties, including Russia, have called for recently. And it is really only through talks that this situation is going to be resolved.
And considering the imposition of more sanctions against Russia, could there be ramifications for the US and the EU if they go ahead with more measures against Moscow?
Well, obviously, Russia would feel obliged to retaliate in some way. I don't mean militarily, I mean economically or diplomatically, some way. Situation basically is that the sanctions could have been imposed by the European Union on Friday when the leaders got together, but they decided to postpone that decision till tomorrow, Monday, so that they could see whether it was possible for the ceasefire to deliver some proper peace. And if not, then the sanctions are likely to go ahead unless Moscow persuades the European Union and by extension, to a certain extent, the United States, that it is acting in good faith and that it does want to try to bring some of these elements in eastern Ukraine under control.
But we do know that Russian lawmakers have withdrawn permission for troops to be deployed in Ukraine. So given this, why do the US and the EU continue to consider putting sanctions in the first place?
Well, they put them in the first place. They put them in and considered them because, of course, Russia did intervene militarily. It has annexed Crimea, and it certainly was supporting some of the separate elements in Donetsk and Luhansk, and that is clearly a violation of Ukrainian sovereignty. So it's understandable that some sanctions were put in place and others have been threatened. But there is a very clear will, not least in the European capitals, to try to resolve this situation diplomatically. But obviously the threat of sanctions has to be there. If you like, it's sort of a carrot and stick approach. The carrot are negotiations, the stick is sanctions if the negotiations don't deliver a genuine peace and some sort of reconciliation process.
So how far do you think Washington can go with its measures against Moscow?
Well, The United States is less directly involved than the European Union is, of course, because Ukraine, along with Moldova and Georgia, just the other day signed an association agreement with the EU, and therefore there's much more to play for on that side. But the United States clearly doesn't want to go so far down the sanctions road that we'd have a sort of Cold War situation as existed when the former Soviet Union was a figure on the international scene. But inevitably, whether it's the United States or indeed some European countries, if sanctions are imposed, for example, on energy imports, then that would have, at least in the short term, quite a knock-on effect on some European economies, less so for the United States.
Well, do you think that sanctioning Moscow will help to bring peace to Ukraine? Where do you think this will lead?
Well, I think it's been shown that it's been helpful that the threat of sanctions have been there, because Moscow has realized how serious Europe and the United States are about backing the government in Kiev, and that has been made very clear. But we shouldn't overblow the situation. We're not talking about a real showdown between Moscow and Brussels, and even less Moscow and Washington, as sometimes used to be the case in the past. So I think the way Mr. Putin has reacted in recent days has shown a good understanding of the situation, the complexities of the situation, and it is a great relief indeed that the Russian legislators withdrew the permission for direct Russian military involvement.
Indeed. Political analyst Mr. Jonathan Fryer there. Thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you.
Both South Korea and Japan have announced that North Korea fired 2 ballistic missiles into the sea earlier today, the second such test in 3 days. The missiles were reportedly launched from the northeast coast and landed in international waters beyond its maritime borders with a range of about 500 kilometers. Now, the latest activity is believed to be a show of protest by Pyongyang against an upcoming visit by Chinese President Xi Jinping to Seoul. Two buildings have collapsed in different parts of India, killing a total of at least 19 people, while dozens are still feared trapped. Heavy rains caused a 12-story building under construction to come down in the southern state of Tamil Nadu, leaving at least 8 people dead as rescuers continued to pull out trapped workers. Earlier on, a residential building collapsed in the capital, Delhi, killing 11 people, including 5 children. And now let's take a look at some light stories making news around the globe.
The Brazilian soccer team, or Seleção, have made it through to the quarterfinals of the World Cup after a nail-biting match against Chile. Part of the World Cup fever is this taxi driver in Porto Alegre, who has decorated his car to resemble a giant Brazilian flag, and he even wears an entire yellow and green uniform to match. Newton Boanova drives around the southern city transporting passengers and spreading joy during the World Cup. Bones of what might be the largest dinosaur ever, a new species of titanosaur that lived some 90 million years ago, has gone on display in Argentina, with thousands of visitors flocking to get a glance of the fossils. To Africa, and as part of Ban Ki-moon's trip to the Kenyan capital, at the close of a UN Environment Summit, the UN Secretary General visited the Nairobi National Park and adopted a 6-month-old lion cub in a heartwarming scene. Final preparations are underway in the eastern Indian city of Puri, where countless devotees are said to arrive to celebrate the world-famous annual Jagannath Ratha Yatra, or the Chariot Festival. This year, about 1.5 million people from across the world are expected to take part in the event.
Now, a reminder of our top stories. The Iraqi army makes major advances in the strategic city of Tikrit after launching a massive military offensive against ISIS militants. Israeli warplanes launch airstrikes on 12 targets in the Gaza Strip as Zionist forces continue their crackdown against Palestinians. And millions of Muslims from around the world mark the beginning of the holy month of Ramadan. That's it for today. Have a good night.